Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. We're just going to take a few moments while people log in. In the meantime, as we wait, if you are comfortable doing so, please add your name and your organization in the chat box, introduce yourself. And welcome to the SID-US 2022 Career Fair. For those that are returning, welcome back. And those that are attending for the first time, welcome. And a huge thank you to our sponsors for today, ACD-Avoca, IDG, and MENA. And before we begin, I just want to have a chance to introduce myself. My name is Malvika Rendive. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the program coordinator here at SID-US. A few housekeeping rules for today, or rather a little bit about SID-US. I won't go very deep into this, but if you are unfamiliar with us, we used to go by SID Washington, and we have recently rebranded to SID United States. You can also find out more information on our website about our rebrand and some of the other activities that we do as well. A few things to note for today: this session is being recorded and it will be shared publicly through our networks and our social media channels. Live transcription, closed captioning is available, which I have enabled right now, and it can be activated through your personal settings. If you have any questions for our speakers for today, please add them to the chat box. We will try to get to as many questions as possible, but we cannot guarantee all questions will be answered given our limited time today. I will now turn it over to our moderator. Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, great. I will continue. Queshia, I will turn it over to you now. Sorry, I am hearing some feedback, and so I'm just trying to make sure that everyone else is muted. There we go. Queshia, I will turn it over to you. Queshia is our co-chair for the Race, Ethnicity, and Diversity Workgroup, and Queshia is also a consultant and founder for the Trailblazers for Global Health. Queshia, the room is yours.
Thank you so much, Malvika. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us from. I am so excited to introduce our guests who will be with us for this panel. So without further ado, thank you again for joining us, and I will jump into introductions before asking some questions, before turning it over to you, the audience, to hear your response. So first, I would like to introduce Ms. Algene Sajery. She is a seasoned foreign policy and national security expert, founder and CEO of Catalyst Global Strategies, a strategic advisory firm providing bespoke public affairs, government relations, business development, commercial diplomacy, and DEIA services. Prior to relaunching Catalyst this month, Algene was a Biden-Harris administration appointee, serving as Vice President of the Office of External Affairs and Head of Global Gender Equity Initiatives at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. In this capacity, she led a team of public affairs professionals, spearheaded the agency's two-time gender lens investing initiative, and supported the agency's DEI and employee engagement efforts. Algene previously spent nearly 2 decades on Capitol Hill. She was senior foreign policy and national security advisor to U.S. Senator Ben Cardin from 2012 to 2020. From 2015 to 2018, Algene was also the Democratic Policy Director of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. She was the first African-American woman and first African diasporan to serve in a senior leadership role on SRC. Algene previously held leadership roles in the House of Representatives, including a Democratic staff director for the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Human Rights, Chief of Staff and LD to Representative Yvette Clarke from New York, Press Secretary to the late Representative John Conyers from Michigan, and co-founder of the Congressional African Staff Association. During her tenure in Congress, Algene co-led legislative and oversight efforts aimed to improving DEIA in the federal foreign policy and national security workforce. I am also very happy to welcome Dr. Chloe Schwenke, formerly served as the first and to date the only openly transgender political appointee at USAID under the administration of President Obama. She is now the founder and president of a nonprofit organization called the Center for Values and International Development that brings applied ethics practices to improve international relief and development outcomes. She is an ethicist, educator, author, and researcher with extensive senior level leadership experience in academia, government, nonprofit, and for-profit organizations. Chloe has work experience in over 40 countries, including 15 years based in sub-Saharan Africa. So let's please give it up for one more person. Introducing Marcia Frimpong, who is the strategy senior consultant in Deloitte's government and public services practice with more than 5 years of experience in public health. At Deloitte, Marcia supports federal and civil sector clients in the health space, working on topics such as health equity, HIV, and health system strengthening. She holds a Master of Public Health with a concentration in global health from Emory University and a Bachelor of Arts in Neuroscience and African Studies from Wesley College. So let's please give it up for our esteemed panelists, all of them trailblazers in many, many rights. So with that, I would like to kick the first two questions over to Chloe and Algene. Just jumping into it. So what can an employee do to hold their employer accountable to DEIA?
I'm happy to start. I think the most important place is to see it in writing. I think it's important that employers have a policy, that the policy is very explicit on DEIA, that it covers all of the categories under DEIA and it covers them appropriately. There are great templates out there now for how to put those policies into place. I will caution that it's relatively easy, although still important, to create such a policy for the home office. It's a whole nother matter trying to make that policy work in field offices or in project offices, particularly where people like me, the people in the LGBTQI plus community are criminalized or otherwise severely persecuted, which is 77 countries around the world, many of which USAID works in. So it's problematic. It's hugely problematic to have two standards of inclusion, one for over there and one for here. So I think it's, in terms of accountability, appropriate for people to initially say, get it right here and get it right here right now, but then be working very intentionally on creating ways to make inclusion mean inclusion everywhere in the world that you work.
Yeah, I agree with everything Chloe just said. I want to also add, it's difficult for an employee to hold their employer accountable though the employer is not committed, right, to DEIA. If there is not that written plan and that written enforcement mechanism for accountability that Chloe mentioned. And so I think what's important is for the employee to find like-minded colleagues who they can talk to and feel comfortable participating in sort of mentorship activities with them and promoting DEIA within the organization, volunteer for a group that does, host a brown bag over lunch with your peers to talk about DEIA. That's something you can do without any formal, approval by management if you just make it an informal lunch, meeting. Talk to your supervisor about the importance of DEIA when you're in an environment where that is welcome, right? You make sure that that's a part of maybe your annual policy retreat or a workforce retreat. Talk to your employer about the importance of DEIA issues. It is very difficult to do that. And I hope to, be able to discuss various strategies to do that. But I think the more important thing is to find people within your organization who think like you, have your own affinity groups, and find mentors that support and can sponsor you and can mentor you along the way, so that you're ensuring that you feel heard and yet your value is heard within the organization.
Thank you so much for that, Algene. And I'm actually, based off of your response regarding, it's difficult, right, to hold an employer accountable. So I'm going to kick a question back to you, and Marcia, please feel free to jump in. So what questions should job seekers be asking to help them kind of assess, does this organization have a commitment to DEIA and other marginalized groups? Is this organization a good fit for me?
Yes, I think even before you get to the point of an interview, once you know that you're going to get the call, you're going to have an interview with the top leadership, you want to go and see if you can find out what the leadership team looks like. Of course, employers usually have websites, et cetera. What does that leadership team look like? How diverse is it? Is there, and then at the interview, ask about the DIA strategy, right? Ask about whether there is competence training for each supervisor on DEIA. Management training that addresses diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ensure that you ask a question about the recruiting efforts and how DIA is valued within the organization. Ask about the organization's values itself, right? If you don't hear inclusiveness, if you don't hear diversity, if you don't hear, that is an organization that values each and every one of its employees, then you know that that's not an organization that's a good fit for you. Because remember that an interview is not just them interviewing you, it's you interviewing them and making sure that they're a right fit for you. And make sure that you ask a question about what policies, procedures, and accountability measures are in place within that organization. That's critical, because you can have a plan, you can have a strategy, but if there's no accountability, there's really not a whole lot of value to it. And so I think that's my recommendation.
Also, sorry, excuse me, I'm like, I am dealing with the end of a cold here. I think also for new job seekers, it can be a bit daunting to ask such questions while an interview is two-way. When it is your first job opportunity, you're trying to make the best impression. I saw someone comment to suggest that you can help with that, and the idea of this being a two-way street. When you are asking these questions, right, it also affords you the opportunity to highlight the ways in which you can support a company as they focus on their DEIA initiatives, what you're bringing to the table. So that's something you can weave into that interview process. And also ask them why DEIA is important to them, right? Like they might have it in place. Is it just to check the box because this is the hot new thing to talk about? Or is this something that they're really committed to and they're making the effort and have been making the effort to address it, rather than this is now the thing that everyone is talking about in the world, and so we are scrambling together to put together a strategy to address this?
Thank you both for your comments. Chloe, feel free to add on to the question that was just asked, but another question I want to bring up for you to take the lead on, and Algene, Marcia, feel free to add on afterward, but what advice or what would you say to someone who has either left their job, someone who has been fired, or someone who was simply not hired by an organization in the past due to an organization not valuing DEIA and other marginalized groups? So how should that be explained to prospective employers?
Thanks, Queshia. It's a tough one. It's a tough one because when you're dealing with that kind of experience in your past, you're probably not feeling a great deal of confidence. You don't really want to talk about it. You may be carrying some trauma from that experience, because losing a job or not being hired when you know that you're very well qualified because of who you are or who you love. These are issues that you have no control over. It is simply who you are or who you love. It is your identity. That's hard. It's hard to carry with you. One of the most important things you can do is to move the discussion away from you and your past experience confronting that kind of bias to being very positive about how much you're looking for an organization that values diversity and recognizes and respects human dignity across the board. You know, taking the moral high ground, I would say that as an ethicist, of course, but taking the moral high ground and arguing that, you know, you're looking for an environment where dignity actually matters, and dignity is held to be universal. Dignity is held to be something that you not just recognize, but you respect in all persons, and that's the environment that you're looking for. You can say that in the past you've had experiences where that kind of employment did not come in, well, it wasn't aligned with those principles, and you were uncomfortable because of that. You felt disrespected because of who you are. Your identity, your particular sense of what you bring was not appreciated. And again, try to keep the positive note in your discussion around this. You know, diverse people bring incredibly unique attributes and skills and experiences that you don't get anywhere else. In my case, as a trans person, I mean, I've been on both sides of the gender reality, and I've got a lot that's unique to my experience and similar to other trans people. We've been there. We've been in those spaces. We've been embodied in different forms. That's an amazing experience. It's not a very comfortable experience, and it's, again, challenging because it can be traumatic. But at the same time, we bring experience. We bring a certain wisdom that is hugely beneficial to organizations, for instance, in humanitarian response or development, that are themselves saying that they're committed to inclusion. We've lived it. And, you know, owning that space, owning that experience, owning that identity, and being proud about that is the best way to be in that situation. Last thing I will say in that comment is that within the LGBTQI plus community, largely speaking, for trans people, it is extremely hard to get employment. It's extremely hard because there is still so much prejudice against trans people, but also because that prejudice goes back decades, and people who would like to work in development or humanitarian response have found it challenging to get educational opportunities, to get, you know, preparation that would allow them to be competitive in this field. These are structural issues that go way back. So it's not just the person sitting in front of you at that interview just right then and there. It's a history of bigotry and exclusion and persecution and worse, much violence to be, you know, dealt with there. So these are tough situations, but it's an important question. So thank you.
Thank you for answering. Algene or Marcia, anything to add? Okay. So, Algene, again, a question for you to lead, and Chloe, Marcia, feel free to add on if you wish. What advice or suggestions or gems do you have for persons who may find themselves in a space that is not conducive to their authenticity? Like, are we telling people a job is a job, just keep your head down and get the work done? Or are there other mitigation strategies or things that can be done for people to truly live their authenticity?
You know, this is a great question. I really love it. And I think in going back to what Chloe, such a wise advice, just said, is that, you know, your own identity should be a source of strength. It should be a source of grit. It should be valued, and you should look at it as a positive and not something that makes you other, but makes you great and makes you a vital part of the team. And I think being your authentic self, you know, there's a lot of discussions about being your authentic self. That's like, you know, very controversial though, because people say, well, if I bring my authentic self, what if the workforce, if the work space is not conducive to my authentic self? And I think that one thing is important is, like I said earlier, find your people. right? If you're in an organization, usually you can find one or two people who think like you, are like-minded, look like you. Just because they look like you doesn't mean they're like-minded, but you can find people who are like-minded in those in any work environment. Create your own network of people. That solidarity, that strength to be able to lean on other people is really, really important. A lot of folks find it difficult to show up authentically at work because, you know, they have imposter syndrome, because they're disproportionately underrepresented, right? Or they have a problem with really figuring out how to be at work versus, you know, your personal persona, your work persona and your personal persona. And I think that when you find these affinity networks and people like you that you feel comfortable talking with, it really makes it better for you, and a better and more positive experience. And so it's really tough to do, but if you find that network, if you find those people that are who think like you really can get to a better place. Also, you know, ensure not just your peer network, but also find a mentor and a sponsor. And that mentor and sponsor could be somebody that looks like you or doesn't look like you, but somebody who's been there and knows the organization. The organizational culture is really important. And that can kind of teach you about how you, as in your authentic self, can better be and thrive in that, within the culture that exists. And also just have as many coffees and meetings with people as you can. It's harder in a virtual world, but reach out to people and just make your team, expand your team. The more coffees, the more people you meet at your workforce, instead of just sitting behind your cubicle or at your desk, the more you will feel like part of the community that is your workforce or your workplace, and the more authentic you will be comfortable being in that place.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have anything to add before I take 2 questions I saw in the chat?
I think also with authenticity, as Chloe pointed out earlier, that's what gives you your oomph in the work that you do. I think you cannot succeed in a place if you're hiding something that is core to yourself. That is what gives you your magical abilities to do the work that you do and do it well. And sometimes you might feel like it is too much of, but the too much of is what got you in that room, right? Your authenticity is what got you there, and it's what's going to allow you to grow and thrive in that space. So really tapping into that and recognizing it for the value that it is and what you bring into that organization. It can definitely be daunting, especially when you are of a marginalized group and you feel like you have to adapt in certain ways in order to succeed. But more often than not, in my experience, the things that make me me are what has allowed me to do well in the spaces that I'm in.
Very great point. And also want to lift up a point that Algene made related to just getting allies and champions and supporters inside and not thinking, oh, because someone looks like me or shares a certain identity doesn't mean that they're for you. Like, you will be surprised what opening it up and just having a diverse group of persons in your support system, how helpful that can be. So questions from the audience, and thank you all again for being with us and for sharing your questions in the chat. So from Sabani, could you please talk about the fact that DEI is not just an HR issue? Can you also share examples from your workplaces or just what your organization is doing to take action in the DEIA space?
I can jump on that. I think, you know, because we're doing something fairly unique anyway, we're the only organization of applied ethicists. So we're all about values, and core to those values is putting human dignity front and center. If we can't be organizations that walk that walk, then there's something wrong. It's a whole lot more than HR. It's got to be a clear sense of what values permeate that particular organization or firm. It's got to be seen in the work that they do, in the conversations that happen in that organization, in the sense of, is inclusion something that is characterizing the interactions between staff? Not just inclusion, but respect for differences. I mean, those differences are valuable. They're really, really wonderful things to have. That they need to be respected, they need to be celebrated, they need to be recognized. There's just a lot of things that really go together with this that makes it way more than just an HR issue. Although HR is a great place for it to be started. HR is where the specific policies around personnel are situated in an organization or firm. It's where you go for accountability. It's where there's a very clear set of mechanisms to deal with violations of that set of standards, or at least failures to fully achieve those standards to make it better. I have a lot of respect for HR, but HR has limits. I mean, they work in a very regulated space. There's all kinds of constraints on how they can do what they do, what they can say, etc. I think what Algene was saying about creating allies and Marcia as well, getting mentors and allies and finding others is going to be a really important piece of getting that solution right and making sure that this is something that is not just fluff. This is something that really characterizes the organization itself. The other way that's really important is to look for opportunities to build inclusion, DEI, etc., into the work that the organization does. If you're looking at proposals being prepared, ask questions to, is this proposal speaking to inclusion? Is it speaking to DEIA? And by the way, the A is a really important addition to DEI, because now we're talking about accessibility for persons who struggle with accessibility and who are not allowed the accommodations necessary for them to be present fully. So I'm really pleased to see that A get added. It needs to be part of this discussion too.
Thank you, Chloe. And as a business development person, I love that you mentioned baking it into the front end, because a lot of people don't realize that's a missed opportunity. Okay, anything to add to that question before I move on to another audience query? Okay, so coming up from Abby, what is your advice on seeking out a mentor or sponsor? I've heard a lot within development that it's very important, but specifically, what advice do you have in finding them and in building up that relationship?
Well, since I mentioned this earlier, I can start. I think that, as I said earlier, it's important to try to get as many coffees, informal, meetings with folks within your organization. Seek out diverse leaders within your organization. And also, I would say, you have a network. You come to the job with your own network of people. Go to use that network to help you find a mentor. You can ask a friend to, introduce you to someone who, is a leader within your organization. Say you're a senior leader that you maybe feel, a little nervous about approaching yourself, but, find a friend that maybe knows them. Ask for coffees, have a strategy to, and it's not really a strategy because that sounds really, contrived, but reach out to people within your organization and say, listen, I'm new to this organization, or I'm trying to advance my career, et cetera. How can you give me some advice? Can I have a 20-minute coffee, buy their coffee, or have a virtual coffee, but buy their coffee if you're in person? And because you're asking them for a favor, and just ask for their advice. Ask about their career journey. You will be surprised how many people will love to tell you about all of the experiences they had getting to where they are. And just the fact that you reached out and asked for that meeting can really impress people and say, okay, well, next time I hear about something, an opportunity for this young lady to join a panel, I'm going to, reach out to them, because they will see that as a positive that you were seeking out their advice. A lot of seasoned people love that. They love to give out their advice. All right. and share their stories.
I'd also, at least in the consulting space where I am, I think one way is think about what you can help them with. We do so much BD. We have so many other things going on within these companies. So where can you plug in so that people can see you? And once you start to work with those individuals and they see, they notice what you bring to the table, I think sometimes it feels icky to think of sponsorship and mentorship as a two-way street, but it is, right? Like when you're younger or older, like Algene said, sharing their experiences and the knowledge and how they've navigated these spaces is super helpful. But also as someone who's on the day-to-day end of delivery like I am, I get to see what's going on at the client level with my peers. And that's information that I have that they're not always in the space to experience, to hear, and to act on. So it is a bilateral relationship, and that's something that you have to keep in mind. Yes, you're taking, but you're also giving back. And so many people are excited to work with early career folks and to mentor and to sponsor and to give the opportunity to help you succeed in these spaces.
Yeah, these are all great bits of advice. All I would add is pretty much saying what Algene said and Marcia. You find those mentors, but don't limit yourself to your organization. You may find that you really need to find a mentor who's outside of that space. For people like me, there are not a whole lot of trans people around to be finding as mentors. Even in the LGBTQI space writ large, I mean, that's 7% of our population. So finding people within that community that can really give you not just advice, but moral support. I mean, it's tough. It's really tough. In fact, most of the development industry right now is not dealing with LGBTQIA+. They're just not there. There's a lot of very valuable and important work being done now on anti-racism. It is not happening for our community yet. You do not see it happening. So this is early days still, and having those kind of mentors and support systems in place for my community is critical. You can find those through some larger organizations like the Council for Global Equality. That's a hugely effective organization in the international development space for LGBTQI people and issues, SOGIESC issues. These are important resources. Human Rights Campaign is not necessarily focused internationally, but it's a great network. And there's others. There's organizations within USAID and other institutions as well. But find them. I think buy that coffee, as Algene said. It's not going to cost you a lot, and you're going to get so much from it. And it's networking. It's really important to have that network to carry forward. Someday, just keep in mind, it's going to be the other way around. And make sure that you're ready to give back. People have done that for you. You're gonna owe that reaching backwards. So keep that in your back pocket.
Love that, thank you all. So switching gears a bit from kind of the newly entering persons into the workspace, looking at kind of the more seasoned mid-career professionals, a two-part question actually that's come in from the audience. So one question, just any general advice for a mid-career change for persons who would like to enter into the DEIA space. And then another question, piggybacking on that, is what advice do any of you have for someone who has a lot of experience overseas, who's looking to fit into a relevant job, especially to a private sector management consulting firm? So again, the questions are, what general advice do you have for mid-career change into the DEIA arena? And then specifically for persons who have majority of their experience abroad, coming into working in the US private sector management consulting space.
Not coming from abroad, but what Queshia I didn't tell her is I was a teacher prior to management consulting, which is a very different field from the work that I am doing now. And I feel like this is harped on a lot about translational skills. But it is very true. One thing that I was very clear about when I was coming to Deloitte was asking questions around DEIA, because as a Black woman, as an African Black woman, these are things that matter to me. As a teacher, I had some very interesting interactions around race, and I wanted to make sure that I was entering a space where at least that was top of mind for the organization. The other thing is the type of work that the organization is doing and what they are prioritizing. So I remember vividly asking about, Deloitte calls it mission-driven work, but like, what good are we putting out into the world in the work that we are doing? How are we making the world better for others? So being clear on your end as the job seeker as to what you want in an organization and what you're hoping to get out of it is really helpful. And also being a teacher and going into consulting, it didn't feel like it was related, but I will say managing clients, synthesizing information and sharing it with people who do not want to always listen to what you're saying. It's very similar to working with children and trying to help them understand concepts and like really get to where you want them to get at the end of the day. So really thinking about the skills that you have and how it relates to where you want to be. It might not be one-to-one, but the connections are always there.
Yeah, I would leverage that. I think that which everything you said is so important, Marcia. All I would add is if you're a mid-career person coming into the DEI space, look at that space and see where the gaps are. You're going to find that your experience to date will be able to help expand where DEI reaches. You know, partly what I just said earlier, DEI is getting pretty good now at approaches to anti-racism. Leverage that for other marginalized groups. See ways that we can learn from that. Leverage the experience of gender equality and gender inclusion work over the last 40 years. And we have so much to learn around inclusion of women and girls. Remember intersectionalities, because it's not just Black people who are being discriminated against, it's Black women, and the dimension of being female has a huge amount to do with this. If you happen to be a Black woman who also has disabilities, I mean, these are all issues that need to be very clearly worked upon, and the work is, there's so much more to be done on the intersectionality space and the harnessing the experiences of gender equality and equity work. All of that is really, really powerful. The other, of course, the other leveraging point from DEI is the work that's now blossoming in USAID and other organizations or donors around inclusive development generally. You know, these are skills that you're learning in DEI that are appropriate for marginalized groups across many different categories, from religious minorities to at-risk youth to lower caste people to all of this. This stuff is really important right now. So you're coming at this mid-career change with some considerable resources to bring to that, you know, that work. Do your own inventory of what you're able to offer, and I think you'll be surprised. You're going to have a lot to offer.
The only thing I have to add is that, you know, I suddenly find I'm in mid-career myself. So, and a lot of my friends are suddenly DEIA officers. And we were just people who, you know, I have a background and I have a degree, undergraduate degree in African-American studies. I never really thought of myself as doing DEIA, but now here I am doing DEIA because I found it really important to talk about these issues. I started a podcast talking about, you know, women of color change makers in politics, policy making, and especially foreign policy. And through that, learned so much about the not only the experience I faced, but other women have faced in their career journeys. And, you know, suddenly I find myself filling that gap, right? As Chloe said. So, you know, it's such a new space. It's the hot new thing. It's really a good time to get into it. If it's, you know, just fill that gap, figure out where you fit in and leverage that. Leverage your authenticity, your uniqueness. Again, your diversity is your strength.
Thank you all so much. And I know you're probably focused on the screen, but the chats are popping. So I don't think we'll get to all the questions, but please make sure to add your questions into the chat so we can make sure to answer them as time allows. Also want to lift up a comment David put in there, noting that LinkedIn could be a very productive, effective tool in helping folks engage and connect with each other. With that, I will go into another audience question, and this is regarding identities. So this is another two-parter, lumping them together. One is, do you have any advice on whether to disclose a disability to a future or current employer? And if so, how and when? The second question is, would you recommend going out of your way to be visible in the workplace in your LGBTQI+ identity, nationality, or other identities that may not be as visible as other aspects of one's identity?
Those are really tough questions and really good questions at that. I mean, the question around disclosing a disability is a really challenging one because it depends on your sense of whether that disability would interfere with your ability to do the job well. I think if you are confident you can do the job well, you're under no obligation to disclose a disability. If you need an accommodation to achieve that performance, I think you're more or less ethically obligated to say you are definitely confident you can get the job done, but that you do require an accommodation. Our laws now are such that that's an obligation that people need to be responsive to, and your forthrightness and noting that is something that people ought to be impressed by and respectful of. So that's an important piece of that equation. As to how much to disclose your identities, I mean, for African Americans, you don't have a choice. For some of us in the LGBTQI community, it's an option. You can, quote unquote, stay in the closet. Trans people, it's nearly impossible. Not always, at least trans women, it's often impossible. Our voices don't necessarily translate as in the female register, etc. Trans men can pretty much easily, get by without having to disclose their identity. But I don't think anybody wants to work in a community that doesn't honor their identity. I think you just got to own it. I don't walk around with a sign saying I'm Chloe, I'm transgender, but when it's appropriate to disclose it, I absolutely do, because I'm not embarrassed about being transgender. I didn't ask for this, but it's what's been given to me, and I'm going to make the most of it in terms of just owning my own identity and the lessons I've learned from that experience. So if you're always conflicted about owning your identity, that's going to be a handicap for you in itself.
Yeah, I mean, Chloe, so wise, such wise advice. And like I said earlier, your identity should be your strength. Your diversity and every aspect of it should be valued. And if you don't feel, in the application process, it can be difficult, right? Because you don't necessarily know yet what that employer, how they value your diversity and your, especially, the workspace for people with disabilities. But you want to make sure that you research where you're looking to go, and understand their culture and their values, and do as much as you can. What I did when I was recruited at one point in time to work for Facebook, it was a great opportunity, but it was Facebook. I was like, oh, very conflicted, right? Working on election work. And what I did is I reached out to my network and through my network talked to like 7 people who were diverse and worked at Facebook. And then I decided I didn't want to pursue that opportunity after speaking to those folks. So, you can figure out a little bit often how that, whether that culture at that organization is something that you want to be a part of. And so again, it's a two-way street in an interview, right? So that's an option.
Thank you. Okay, so another two-part question, just for the sake of time, I'm going to lump them together. One is very, very specific. So one audience member wants to know if anyone can speak to gender and DEIA impact investing. Any tips on how to get into that space? And then the second one's a bit more broad. Chloe, going off of your point about the importance of the A in DEIA, this audience member wants to know, how do we speak to DEI beyond color, race, sexual orientation, language, to also include nationalities, especially given international development and global work that we all do.
I can definitely, oh, Chloe.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I can definitely speak to gender lens investing. I previously worked at DFC. My most recent position was at, in addition to being the head of external affairs, I ran our gender lens investing program, which is called the 2X initiative. And there's a global community of development finance institutions called 2X Collaborative. How to break into that space without knowing much about your background in the impact investing field, it's kind of tough to give specific advice. However, there are opportunities in that space. It's a growing field. The sense that women entrepreneurs need access to capital is critical. And if you need someone to who's in the field and you want to talk more, please do reach out to me. I'll put my information in the chat because it's really hard to give advice about how to break in if I don't know much about your background. But it's a burgeoning field, and it's one that really needs more support. More than just microfinance, but actually deploying capital to small, medium-sized enterprises owned by women, women of color, and locally ran enterprises. So not just expat communities and expat companies, but also locally ran companies that are ran by women entrepreneurs from the developing world. So there's a lot there, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
I know nothing about that, so I'm glad you answered that part of the question, Algene. All I can offer on the second part of that question is the fact that we're dealing with complexity. We're dealing with all kinds of diversity, and if we try to always disentangle and decompress and all of that stuff and say, well, let's just talk about this group or that group or this group, we're just going to get ourselves in knots. I think the most important thing is to go back to first principles, that every single person ought to be treated as a dignified human being. If you can't have that conversation at the organization or firm level, you're missing something really important about who you are as an organization or a firm, the work that you do, etc. I know very few organizations sit down and talk about things like dignity. That's kind of what we do as ethicists, is to facilitate those kinds of conversations because they need to happen. People do international development work and humanitarian response work because they care. And that caring is really, they care for everybody, particularly people who are experiencing poverty or any kind of challenge to their freedom and their opportunities and their development. We need to talk. We need to have those conversations and open up spaces within our organizations and firms to literally talk about dignity. Make that an open conversation, a discourse, if you will, that allows us all to really move that whole agenda forward. This is not about, making this little letter the letter of the month. It's got to be a whole lot deeper than that. And it's going to be transformative. It's how we're getting there on women and women's equality. It's taken a long time. We need to build from that, and we can.
Thank you all. So looking at the time, let me see if there is one more question we can maybe go to. So sorry. Okay, I think this could be an interesting one. So another, and this will be our last question, I promise, and I will kick it over for us to close out the event. But you all have touched on this more or less from different angles, but what would be a good quote unquote business case, right, to make for an organization? And this is geared towards someone who's maybe HR, hiring manager, someone of senior leadership. What's the business case to be made for organizations to actually integrate DEI dimensions and not just one-offs, but being very intentional and looking at it from, again, an intersectional lens?
You know, I've worked in the policy space on Capitol Hill and for almost 20 years, and then worked in an agency where I was the only, okay? Even though we were always serving a diverse population, okay? I think the business case is, especially in international development, you want the perspectives of the people you serve. You want, if you are putting out a product, if you are doing work in development in a developing world, and you don't have people on your team, on your management team that understand that community that you're serving, then you're not doing anything. You're not really going to be successful. I have a lot of friends that work in the global health space, and I remember one of my friends and my friends talking to me about every time I walk into a global health happy hour, or I go into a meeting, and I go into a panel, I'm the only Black woman at the table. That doesn't make any sense. Because when we're talking about global health, we are talking about programs that impact the global community. And so that is the business case, is that you can be so much more successful as an organization if you have people who can understand the lived experience of the people that work with you. I mean, that you're choosing to serve or you're looking to serve. The people who speak the language, people who understand the culture. So important. The business sense is, it makes sense. It makes you more effective. It makes you more impactful as an organization. And it gives you more credibility with the people you seek to serve.
I can't add a whole lot to that. I think that's a really good answer, except, I mean, just to note that, you know, look at the tea leaves. The conversation in international development right now is about localization. It's about decolonization. It's about partnerships with local people. If you can't deal with diversity here, how are you going to deal with diversity there? I mean, get with the program, people. Do you want to be effective in international development? Do you want to be effective as a humanitarian response organization? You got to be there. You got to be there, physically putting yourself there, mentally putting yourself there. I would say personally, spiritually putting yourself there. You got to be there. And being there means respecting those people and learning from them. Stop telling them what to do. Start listening to what they're saying to you that they need, that they're about, what their identities are. And if you've got those DEI skills, you're going to be a good listener, and you'll be a good actor from that point onwards to move that agenda forward together.
Thank you all so much. So can we, I think it's possible for the panelists to go off mute, or please do your reactions. Let's just give all of our panelists a round of applause today, whether that's putting something in the chat. We've already seen a lot of great positive feedback. So again, thank you so much, Algene, Chloe, Marcia, for your time, your gems, your energy. I think it was a good, at least for those of us on the East Coast, it was a good, again, perk up in the day, better than espresso. So we've heard a lot today, everything from the need to be proud and honor and center your identities, but not boxing yourself in and knowing you're much more than that. We've heard the importance of relationship building, right? Of connecting, of seeking those mentors, those supporters, and inside any organization, whether you think you have a common agreement or not. Again, you'll be surprised what working across the aisle, what working in different diverse groups can get you. I believe someone put the LinkedIn for all of our panelists in the chat, but this is a part of doing the thing. This is step one, right? Connecting. How do you follow up? So thank you again so much to our panelists. Thank you, SID-US, for putting on this awesome career fair. With that, I will kick it back over to you, Malavika.
Thanks, Queshia, and thank you so much for moderation today and wonderful conversation and very important conversation. And thank you all of our speakers for being a part of this. Thank you all for joining as well. And our next session that will be happening is our networking session from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. We hope that everyone is able to join, including our speakers, and you can get to know a lot of our participants today one-on-one. The exhibit hall is also now open, and so please make your way to the exhibit halls. And please make sure you get a chance to fill out our post-event survey. We do very much value your opinions and your experience at this panel today and would like to implement them in our future events. So thank you all for being here today and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening.